a chance to review the minutes, I'll look for a motion to approve the July 18th steering committee meeting summary.
So moved.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let's move on to item 3. This is a recap of our Central OK Go progress. Diane Cowan of URS is going to lead us through this process. Diane.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks everybody for being here. I know we've got a big game coming up in the next few days. You know, as I've admitted before, I live in Austin, so I'm aware of it as well, but I have a feeling I'm going to be ashamed. I am wearing red today. So.
It's funny, they don't consider it a big game anymore.
I know.
They're more worried about the Baylor game.
Just saying.
That's why I'm wearing red.
Just don't fire Mac. Just don't fire Mac.
All right, so to jump right in, because we do have a very full agenda today, and we've got a lot of good information to share with you, and we're hoping to get a lot of good feedback and your opinions as well. So I'm just going to jump in and say for today, really, we've got 3 goals that we have. Is to understand, really to kind of get an understanding out there of the process for selecting alignments, or the lines on the map, if you will, as well as how did we screen them. So we came up with a universe of alternatives, of different alignments, and then we've screened through them from a technical aspect. So really just get an understanding of that out there. And then the next thing is to really define those alignments moving forward. So that's really important today. Is we've come up with what we think are some technical solutions for potential alignments to move forward into a more detailed analysis, but we really need you all's input to tell us if we've missed something, or if you don't like what we've come with, to really give us that level setting, if you will. And we also want to get a sense from you all of the modes that you think are important, or the types of transit in the different corridors to move forward, whether that's rail, express bus rapid transit, that sort of thing. And then finally, we really want to get the word out on opportunities for stakeholder and public involvement on the project, and so we'll go through a little bit of our upcoming outreach items that we've got going on, and ask for your help as far as that goes. So to real quickly recap where we've been and where we're going, this is kind of a simplified graphic, if you will, although it's kind of busy, that goes through and kind of tells you, going from the very beginning of the study, where it's kind of a big amorphous cloud, if you will, an idea that's out there, and we start to formulate what it is that people are looking for the study with the goals and objectives exercises that we've been doing in the past. And then also kind of collecting existing information, and then we start to, bring that universe of alternatives down, make it less amorphous, and have actual alignments on the maps. That's kind of where we're at this point. You can see that we're going to present that out to you today. That's why we've got the "You Are Here" arrow. We're about to go into more detailed evaluation, but we really need input before we do that. And then finally, the goal of the overall commuter study is to really select locally preferred alternatives for each one of the 3 corridors. And throughout, the orange, on the right-hand side, the orange line there is really talking about engagement and public and stakeholder engagement, making sure that that's happening throughout the process. So let's jump right in. There's a lot of words on the slide, but we wanted to make sure things were documented, for everyone. You could go back and read them if you want. We did send out packets, and so you guys did get maps as well as a matrix. So if you brought that with you today, great. If not, we do have some extra maps with you as well to go over. But so first off, we wanted to, of course, identify alignments. And so to do that, in any transit study of a corridor, nature, you're basically kind of mixing a little bit of art and science, if you will. So with science, you're really collecting all that existing conditions. So where are the major activity centers? Where's your existing population? Where's the future population? Where's, what capacity do you have on existing transportation corridors? Where are there issues with transportation movement? So that's kind of the science that you're kind of pulling all that data together, you're putting it into a computer, and you're crunching numbers.
And then we basically lay that out, and we've got a world of alternatives on there all over the place. And then really, you know, our transit experts as well as our local experts sit down and really kind of filter through that and do more of the art. Really to try and make it more real world. What makes sense? What's going to be viable routes for transit? What makes sense for the local area, depending on which corridor we're in. So that's kind of the mixture of that art and science, if you will, of coming up with good transit routes for the future. So sometimes what you'll end up seeing is that maybe the data might say, oh, this is the best route, but perhaps it doesn't really make sense from a local's perspective of actual use or getting to the right, from one right activity center to another. It might touch on a lot, but it might not touch on the two major ones you need to. So it's really kind of a nice balance. So you'll see that as we go through some of these. That maybe some might have scored high on the data, but when we looked at it from a transit and local perspective, we adjusted those a little bit. And we'll go through those in detail. So once we went through for each corridor and came up with alignments, we came up with actually 7 in each corridor. So that's kind of our universe of alternatives, if you will, for each corridor. And then we've obviously got to start to screen that down because you're not going to have 7 routes going through from a transit perspective. So how did we do that? As you guys remember, with our goals and objective exercises, we were trying to really get a sense of what's important to the RTD, looking at it from a regional perspective, then also from each one of the corridors. And we talked to them about goals and objectives as well. So we understood for the north corridor what was important, the east corridor, and the south corridor what was important. So we used the goals and objectives to really come up with criteria. Okay, so, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. A couple of important things about our methodology, though, just to start off is one of the goals from the RTD, the maximize regional participation, and that also has a lot to do with funding. That we're going to use on the next more detailed analysis because we need a little bit more finer refinement, if you will. We need to have a better sense of where a station might be, that sort of thing, to understand, you know, really utilize that goals and the criteria that would come from that. Additionally, right now, when we're just trying to narrow the universe, we also don't look specifically at a particular mode. We start to get a sense of them. We'll talk a little bit about that, but we're really not saying, you know, this is a rail alignment, this is a bus alignment. We're not comparing those right now. We're saying this line on the map versus that line on the map. And then again, station locations at this point, we're really looking at the alignment. We have a general sense of where you want to touch, but the station analysis also comes in this the second phase, which is the more detailed analysis. And then we go through and we try and take all of the criteria that we've developed off of those goals and objectives. We weight them based on what we heard from the different corridors. So if you guys remember the corridor workshops that we had, we went out to the stakeholders in the public and we asked them to rank the RTD goals and objectives. And once they did that, then we had kind of what is important to north the most important? What is most important to the east corridor? What is most important to the south? And we actually used that for our weighting of our criteria so that comes into play. And then also, just important to note, we ranked alignments at this stage as well, just within their own corridor. So when we're looking at south, we're ranking the alignments within the south itself against them and coming up with like alignment 1, 2, and 3 from that. We're not looking at south versus east or south versus north or anything like that at this point in time. Although we're always trying to make sure we're looking at any through trips that might happen from, say, the east down to the south, south up to the north, and vice versa. Okay, so just quickly to go through an example. I'm not going to go through all of them. Again, you did get this in your packet. But for example, on the first goal, enhance regional connectivity, we'll focus in on the red circle, or if you will, maximize connections between major activity centers. So that would be an objective of enhancing regional connectivity, right? So to measure maximizing connections between major activity centers, a criteria would be, okay, what are the number of activity centers that you're hitting? And so really to do that from a, if you look under description, that kind of describes a little bit more about how we actually get into doing that. We look at a half mile around the alignment. That's a standard transit industry approach, if you will. Especially when it comes to a station location, you'll hear that a lot. A half mile is usually what they say people will walk. Although I think, for us here in Oklahoma, and sometimes in Texas too, it's more of a quarter of a mile because it's hot. But that's a standard thing, is half mile. So we use that. And then we also split the activity centers into differing types. For example, there'd be a regionally significant activity center for, let's say, like a Tinker Air Force Base, or downtown here, if you want to go to, everyone goes to a Thunder game, so that's a regionally significant, that would be a draw from all around. Whereas a locally significant on the other side of the scale would be, maybe it's your town, a local town shopping district, that sort of thing. And you might get some regional trips, but most likely you're getting most of those from a local standpoint. So we weight them a little bit differently. So that's an example of how we go from the really big idea of a goal, try and narrow it down to something we can quantify. So we did this for every single goal, every single objective. We came up with criterias and established the matrix that we had sent out to you. Again, here's the second goal: support economic development and shape growth. The objective for that, one of them anyways, was compatibility with current and future land use and land use plans. And so the criteria for that would be, okay, what are the existing and planned land uses, obviously, and any plans that are out there. So we looked at the ACOG, existing and future land use designation. So there's actually a computer file that designates the existing as well as the future land uses that are planned in the different communities. And then we actually met with the different communities as well and talked to them about their land use plans in the future, as well as looking at the comprehensive plans and that sort of thing. So the final goal that we looked at from an RTD perspective was provide a balanced and coordinated multimodal system. And so on this one, maximize opportunities for multimodal connections is the objective. And the criteria that I'm honing in on here as an example is existing and proposed bike trails. So anytime a bike trail came into our half mile of the alignment, that kind of shows that there's an ability for a multimodal connection of bike to transit connection. So we looked at that as one of the options. So that's essentially how we went through and did the analysis. From a data standpoint, where we used your goals, used your objectives, and then made them into real criteria that we could quantify. And then we, as I said, kind of did what I call the art of it, and sat down and really had workshops, a series of workshops to go through and kind of correct, if you will, areas to make sure that major destinations were being hit the right way, that traffic flows made sense for a particular alignment, that sort of thing. So unless there's any questions in regards to that, we'll get into the alignment analysis results for each one of the corridors, unless anyone's got questions. No? All right.
All right.
Ian?
Well, Andrea and I are going to walk you through the results of the alignment analysis as well as the rankings for each corridor. Before we get started in that, I wanted to point out again that you do have copies of the maps in front of you there. They're the same as what we sent out in the email. You'll see that one map has all the alignments on it, and then the second map will have the recommended alignments that we're recommending to take to the detailed analysis. So I'm going to step you through the south corridor, and then I'm going to hand it over to Andrea, and she's going to step us through the east and the north corridors. So the first map we have here for the south, obviously this is the correct orientation. You see Oklahoma City up top in the north, and then obviously in the south you have Norman down at the bottom. It's kind of difficult to see those, so we decided for this presentation, we're actually going to change the orientation on you here, so it's going to be a little strange. But it's a lot easier to see the alignments if we turn it on its side. So obviously with the copies you have in front of you, you can turn it however you want to look at it, whatever makes most sense. But for us, right now, what we're looking at on the screen is you'll now have Oklahoma City, downtown Oklahoma City on your left, and you'll have Norman and OU on your right. So this map we're looking at here has all 7 alignments that we looked at in the south corridor. You'll see each color is a separate alignment that we analyzed. A majority of these alignments parallel or follow pretty closely to the I-35 or BNSF freight rail alignments. But we did also look at some alignments that a little further out west as well as further out east, so that we could get a good cross-section of alignments and make sure we're really covering all our bases here. A couple things I want to point out. Obviously, we have all of these alignments beginning or ending, however you want to look at it, in downtown Oklahoma City at the existing Santa Fe with the proposed intermodal hub. And then they all end around the OU area, generally around the Duck Pond area. So we'll jump in here to the results of the analysis. What you're looking at here is a stacked bar graph. Each bar represents a separate alignment. So you'll see S1 through S7. The different colors represent the different goals. So for instance, if you look at S4 in the middle there, the blue on the bottom part of the bar is the enhanced regional connectivity goal. So that shows you visually the amount of points it received for that goal. And then obviously the same for the red, that's support economic development and shape growth. And then the green, provide a balanced and coordinated multimodal system. So this is the same obviously for each of the alignments. You'll see you can compare how they rank for the different goals. We do have some instances, if you look at S1 for example, where if you look at the green part, the multimodal system, it actually scored negatively on that goal. So the overall points it received are the diamond shape, the black diamond. And so you'll see that that's actually lower than what you see on the bar itself. So if you want to know total points, that's the black diamond. And if you want to just kind of see how it fell out within the goals, you can see the difference in the colors. So our top 3 alignments that came out of this technical analysis were S4 was our top, followed by S2 and S1. And we'll get into looking at those routes here in just a minute. Just some general points on the south corridor. The work groups that we went out and presented to and got their feedback, they told us that enhanced regional connectivity was the most important goal to them. So we weighted that the highest. Their second goal was actually economic development, so we ranked that second, weighted that a little bit lower. And then thirdly was the multimodal system, so that received a little bit fewer points. Looking at the enhanced regional connectivity, alignments S1, S2, and S4 all received the highest scores for that goal. And then S2 and S4 also performed really well on the supporting economic development and shaping growth. And so 1, 2, and 4 were the highest ranked alignments coming out of the south. And so here you can see visually those alignments. Again, Oklahoma City's on your left and Norman's on your right. The red line is S1. That follows the existing BNSF rail right-of-way for the entire length of the alignment. So it begins at the Santa Fe station downtown, travels along BNSF through Moore into Norman, and then obviously ending down by OU. There is an opportunity to connect there with the existing Amtrak station in Norman. And then if you look at the S2, that's the green line there. That also travels down Shields actually, instead of BNSF, out of downtown. And then it crosses I-35 and it jumps onto the BNSF. So this is sort of a roadway, rail right-of-way hybrid. And then travels BNSF down through Moore and Norman, and again ending down at OU. And then finally, the S4 is it's an all roadway alignment. It travels out of downtown along Shields, and then hops on 35 and takes 35 for a short stretch, gets on Flood, goes down Flood to Lindsay, and then into OU and Norman. So these are the 3 that, based on our analysis, ranked out the highest for the South Corridor. And these would be the 3 that we're recommending that we would move forward with in the detailed analysis. So what I'd like to do here is just kind of stop for a minute and get your feedback on generally what you think about this. If you've had a chance to look at the matrix, or if you've looked at this outside of this meeting, that'd be great. We'd like to hear your feedback on your thoughts. And then after we get through that, the next slide actually is going to be a vote. So we'll actually use these clickers that we handed out, we've used before. and you're gonna, she's showing you over here. And you're going to vote for, if you agree with the alignments, or if you don't agree, you'll be able to give some detail. If there's some specific ones you don't agree with, or if you think, you know what, let's throw it all out and start over. We hope you don't say that, but that's possible. So, so I'd like to just open up the floor and see if anybody has any comments on these.
Would you make a wild guess on economics? Is there significant spread in costs in these routes?
In costs. I think that one of the things when it comes to costs, you've got whether you can use existing right-of-way or whether you've got to pay for right-of-way, right? And so that really comes into play with your mode choice as well. So some of the on-street could be bus, or you could have some form of rail. With the bus, from when it comes to the right-of-way standpoint, depending on which type, if it's a dedicated right-of-way bus, like a BRT, bus rapid transit, or if it's an express bus, which just kind of runs in the existing street network, that would usually lend towards being the cheaper version. When you have to actually purchase right-of-way and you know, that sort of thing, then it starts to increase the cost from that standpoint. I don't know, Ian, if you've got, I mean, the lengths are generally the same, so that really isn't a factor in this particular corridor.
So, I mean, are y'all saying we should make a choice now, not based on economics?
Are you talking about the cost of implementing them, or are you talking
I'm
about
just
the
thinking,
potential
you
for
know,
income?
one of these costs 10 times more than the other one, why would we choose it?
Yeah, that will come out in the detailed evaluation.
Well,
We haven't really gotten that far down the road at this level.
Doesn't the route imply the mode?
No.
So, but we're not gonna put BRT on a BNSF rail.
I think it does. I mean, it does imply, and that's kind of what my spiel will be later, is just sort of matching up the modes to the different alignments.
And that's partly why you recommended pursuing analysis of three. One of them is roadway only, one of them is rail only, and the other one's the hybrid, so that you get, I'm guessing when we go through it, you'll see each of the three recommended ones leads you to one of the routes, and so you can see a different type of mode in the next step, but only one of that type of mode, not two pure rail routes, not two pure road routes.
Some of the alignments will look at multiple modes, but some of them will only look at one mode because it is the most logical.
Right.
And I'm going to go over that here in a little bit.
Can't bring heavy rail down flood.
Correct.
Blair, what was your comment?
You can't bring heavy rail down flooded in Norman. Like, I mean, so some of the routes do preclude certain modes. And you're not gonna pay to build a new roadway on BNSF for a BRT either, so.
Right.
If you're gonna use commuter rail as one of your modes, it's limited. It's BNSF.
Right.
If you're doing multi-modes, then two or three of these could be combined in some way.
Right, not to steal Andreas' thunder here in a minute, but the rail corridors themselves, I mean, even in this one, didn't score as well as the other two, because if you think about it, a freight corridor is not really hooked up to the activity centers. But the consultant team, because this whole study is predicated on these corridors, we're not really prepared to eliminate those from consideration, because in the detailed evaluation, we will look at things like, well, what about potential development around the corridors and things like that, so we don't want to dismiss that at this point. So that, I mean, it's the third lowest. It actually scored closer, the pure BNSF rail line scored closer to the other alternatives in the south corridor than in the others, but we want to bring them forward. And except, I guess we got a debate in the east. We want to talk to you all about that.
We've had some interesting discussions about Lindsay Street, Norman lately, and so I wondered if the very specific, I guess, inner Norman route is important to the overall route selection, or I need you to advise me on when to take a stand on bringing transit through campus. We don't want it to come through campus.
Okay.
Because there's a huge debate right now about we want it to come to campus, but we don't want it to bisect campus.
I see.
So,
And is that dependent on mode, or is that just in general?
Well, you can't bring it through campus under the current right-of-way constraint, which is 66 feet, because of the congestion. And right now, the debate is, we have probably the highest capacity pedestrian crossing in the state of Oklahoma, between our south campus and.
So you're talking about Lindsay Street?
Yeah, and so in order for you to, my point is, you can't do any type of high-capacity transit there unless you change the right-of-way, and we want to keep the right-of-way where it's at, so. But for instance, otherwise, the S4 route could be great, it's just maybe it bumps over the border and comes down.
I think there will be ample opportunity throughout this process to kind of tweak the alignments as we go.
The quarter route would also make it more conducive to intermodal with the rail. On the south side.
Okay, so as far as that goes, it sounds like we need to be looking at Porter perhaps as an alternative to the Lindsay connection in. Okay, so that's good to know. That's exactly what we want. Okay, and so everyone, though it sounds like I haven't really heard anything about concerns over the BNSF alignment, we want to include that.
This is actually the corridor that the rail alignment did the best.
It makes a lot of sense. It does go through some of where the major activity centers are, which is beneficial. You know, you've got portions of it that are industrial, but there's also portions that are right in the downtown. So it's kind of a good alignment from that standpoint.
Well, it's interesting, as we said, you know, a lot of the rail alignments didn't necessarily touch the activity centers. But in this case, you know, once you get down into Norman and you're in the rail alignment, it really does get you closer. I mean, it kind of gets you right into downtown and right into OU, so.
I guess I can't get, like Roy can't get my mind away from the cost. I know what is gonna be the greater cost if we were to do something with rail involved of any type. And there was a study that was talked about several weeks ago on NPR about the difference between commuter rail using existing tracks and light rail. And the argument on that was that because the existing rail doesn't go to places where people want to go shopping unless it becomes a redevelopment around that area, that even though light rail is a lot more expensive, in the long run it accomplishes more because you can, after buying right-of-way, get it more where you want it to go. But I can't get that out of my head right now, so I'm thinking economics.
We'll be looking at all of the above, you know, with those alignments. And I don't think just because we're looking at a solely BNSF alignment that we're gonna dismiss light rail. But you do have issues by putting light rail into a freight corridor. First of all, the freights are not gonna like it at all. Secondly, you need to make sure there's all of the right of way there, and they have to be separated with a wall, with a derailment wall. So you need a lot of space in order to pull off light rail within one of those corridors. But we'll put that in there and we'll estimate the costs and we'll let the evaluation
But
take its course.
commuter rail could go.
Commuter rail
without-
totally will go in there, and it is typically lower capital cost. We'll probably need to put some sidings in at the station so that we get the passenger trains off the corridor,
Yeah.
things like that. So there's capital costs associated with that, but I mean, we'll put our best guess on what that particular mode would look like. And then once we pick an alignment and we pick a mode, then it gets refined. And, you know, after we, you know, essentially our a locally preferred alternative gets refined to sort of minimize impacts and costs and maximize ridership.
And then deal with the last mile or the last few
Yes.
blocks issue.
Well, and all of these corridors need a bus network feeding them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a part of these, you know, when we're going into the modeling, the next part, that's a big part of these different build scenarios is what does the bus system look like feeding it?
So we'll still have all modes on the table if we approve these three preferred alternatives. Is that
Correct.
right? And then we can have
Correct. Yeah, so on this first one, it's really kind of trying to decide, are we covering the right areas in the corridor? And do they seem like reasonable alignments? Once we get into that more detailed analysis, that's when we really start looking at the cost estimating. How much does it cost, not only from a capital, but from an operation and maintenance ongoing standpoint, so you know what you're getting into in the long run. And then we also look at what's the likelihood of getting funding. What type of funding is potential do you have with each one? So, you kind of start to, once you get your mode decided on, first you gotta do your alignment, then you start coming up with, well, what are, for example, the shields, the green example where we go on the shields and on the BNSF, you could have a potential mode that's commuter rail, a light rail, and maybe a BRT, let's just say as an example. So as an example for that, you'd have one alignment on the map, but maybe 3 modes, so that's 3 alternatives for that one alignment. And then based on those different modes and the length of that alignment, you're gonna have different cost estimate from both capital and operations. And you're gonna have a different type of potential funding source based on that as well.
So now we've all stolen each other's thunder, so we're all.
Now we're talking about everything we can go home.
Wait a minute, you need to get somebody's thunder. Sorry.
And we're done.
Those are great questions, though.
You want us to choose one of these, and then you're gonna see how it ranks.
Actually, we're recommending that these 3 move forward.
Oh,
And
just
if you
agree
guys
with
wanna
that.
add, like you said, we can add in the Porter instead of the Lindsay, or, have both in there, just
Quarter
depending.
sort of floodway.
Well,
Right. And then we can, we can add that in instead, adjust it, and then that's the alignments moving forward.
So in this case, we've taken it from 7 down to 3, and that's what we're recommending.
The fewer the better going into this next level, obviously, but
Yeah.
we don't want to dismiss anything prematurely.